You are listening to One Nation Under Crime, a historical, chronological, true crime podcast. Each week, we go through our nation's history and discuss cases from each year, starting in 1800. I'm Kayla.
And I'm Leah.
We are back from a unexpected week hiatus. Sorry about that, guys.
Kayla had quite the time.
The flu hit our house in a big way.
It just busted through the door.
Y'all have no idea how accurate that description is to what my weekend was like. It was not a good time. My daughter was sick. I got sick. It just was not going to happen. So
there was no texting.
No, it was just
there was no SOS.
No,
I was like, Kayla doesn't like me anymore. I've done something to anger her.
So sick.
I was going to send a search party.
You know what? They wouldn't have wanted to be here either. It was no fun. So I greatly appreciate y'all being so kind and giving us the week off, even though I know it was unexpected.
We tried a choice.
I know. We try to not do those things. I try and at least plan out a little bit in advance if we do have a week hiatus or something coming up. But I greatly appreciate it because it was definitely needed. Nothing was going to be going on. So either way, we have this week our cases. This happens occasionally where we have cases that kind of back up to one another within a couple of weeks that all have similar threads through them where it's like, oh, that thing that we just talked about 2 episodes ago. Yeah, I remember that.
I like it when that happens.
This one is an interesting one.
Oh, dear.
This is not a case per se. It's a little different.
Does somebody die?
Not at... Yes, but it's not... This is a large event that we're going to discuss.
Okay.
So I think a couple of people do die, but this is a large event of things that occurred that we're going to get into some politics of things that were going on at the time.
Okay.
So one of our main sources, it was actually kind of hard to find information on this. So one of our main sources, allthat'sinteresting.com, where you can find things that are interesting.
Well, there you go. I guess
all things that are interesting.
All things that are interesting. I'm assuming we don't have a murder by gaslight this time.
No, there's not a murder by gaslight on this one.
Disappointing.
The next episode there is. The next couple episodes. So I'm waiting until our murder by gaslight days have officially out.
I'll be very
gone,
sad.
But it will be. So.
We'll have to raise a glass.
We will. We have, and actually what's funny is in our next episode, they are one of the sources, and there's someone else who I have as a source who I've recently used, and they both have conflicting information. Ooh. So I don't know which one is correct because there's so little information on this other case too. So you'll get to see both sides of that as well. But we have our births in 1857.
1857.
Yes, February 1st. This is just a fun name. Lucy Wheelock.
Wheelock?
Wheelock.
Like Warlock, but Wheelock?
It's wheel.
Like the wheels on the bus go round and round?
Wheel OCK. Okay. Which is funny that you say wheels on the bus because she was an early childhood education pioneer within the kindergarten movement and now the namesake of Boston University's College of Education. She's an Aquarius.
Near and dear to my heart.
I know. Right in your... So you should have known who she is.
I mean, I guess that's the song I came up with.
Must be.
I mean...
February 13th. This is a name.
Oh, I love fun names.
This is an interesting one. Almanzo.
Ooh.
You might actually know this one.
Oh, wait. Is this
James Wilder?
I was going to say, is this Laura Ingalls Wilder's
He's an
husband?
Author and the husband of Laura Ingalls Wilder. He is also an Aquarius.
Did you read that series? Please
We talked about this in an episode, actually.
I can't remember what you said.
Yes, I read some of it.
Not all of it.
we discussed this in that episode too. I wasn't a huge, it's no surprise that it was one of your favorites and not mine. So I liked it enough. I think I read the first one for sure. I want to say I read 2 more after that, but I know I didn't make it through the whole.
You didn't make it to Alonzo?
I didn't make it through everything.
Oh my gosh. Let me tell you, I'm not surprised. Loved.
See, but you're series. Also, you probably liked Little Women too.
Oh, one of my absolute favorite books.
Yeah. I see that wasn't really my cup of tea either.
Yeah. Little Women and Gone with the Wind.
Yeah. See, those are 2 totally different aesthetics for us. I'm more of a Poe.
Yeah, and I'm Bronte.
Yes. So there's that.
I'm Martha, you're Snoop.
There's that. Yeah, it's quite interesting. But
That's hilarious.
I did enjoy the books for what they were, but it wasn't, I want to say I picked it up and it was kind of one of those things that I picked it up and I read it just because it was like, I think a lot of other people were starting to read it. And so I read it and then I read like the next couple of ones because I was like, I guess I'll kind of see what happens. Yeah. And I read really fast.
Yeah.
Like I'm a very, very fast reader. So, I mean, I would check out 3 books from the library every week and finish all of them. And I mean, it was okay. But
well, I love biographies. I always read biographies. Like that's what I would always read when I was in school because I loved the history. I mean, podcast. But I always loved the history of people, like to learn more about them.
Yeah,
and
I do like that
a
lot.
What the series is. I mean, you're learning history, but it's biographical too.
Yeah, I don't know. There was something about it that I couldn't grasp onto. And I don't.
It's too wholesome for you.
Honestly, probably. That's probably exactly what it is. Because I was reading like that. I read a lot of Harry Potter. I read a lot of...
Harry Potter wasn't out when I was that age.
Well, but I like reading a lot of things that are not... I like a lot of supernatural things, like just kind of that like fantasy, I guess is more what I appreciate.
As well. I do like that.
And I think it's because like it pulls you out of reality.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
I prefer those kinds of books. Like even now I still like, you can see my bookshelf over here. This is my more morbid bookshelf. Stephen King. That one I haven't started yet. But it's coming. I finished The Butcher and the Wren by Elena Urquhart. If you have not bought this book yet, and I will say this because if you know the name Elena Urquhart, Leah does not.
I do not.
Then you are a true crime podcast fan because she is one half of the Morbid True Crime podcast, and
which I know is important.
Yes, and she I've told you about her. She was an autopsy tech and she has her podcast, everything. So anyway, she wrote a book called The Butcher and the Wren. It is, I finished it in probably a night. Wow. It was good. It was very good. I'll say this.
Say it.
I did not, how to say this without giving anything away from the book. Something occurred because there's a part 1 and a part 2 to the book. It's kind of split in half. And when the part 2, the twist came at part 2, I was genuinely shocked.
That's not usual. Usually you see things coming.
Yeah. And it's because each chapter, one is from the butcher and the other is from the wren. So each perspective. And the wren she's an autopsy person in Louisiana. And then there's the butcher and that's like the killer. And so each chapter, you're bouncing back and forth between the two and what they're doing and what they're seeing. And then it's like part 1 ends and part 2 starts. Like it took me a second because I was like, I'm really confused. What happened? And I went back and I read one chapter and I was like, I'm so confused as to what happened. Like, what is going on? And I went back and I read it again. And all of a sudden, like, I was sitting there, my boyfriend was he was cooking and he just heard me go, and he was like, what? And I was like, I know. I know you're not going to read this, and I know this isn't good, like, but this is what happened, and this is like insane as to what the twist is. So I had to pause the recording real quick.
I figured.
And I had to tell Leah what the twist was. It's a good one, isn't it?
It sounds. I'd watch the movie.
It's funny you say that. It's going to be an HBO series. I just totally forgot about that until you said that. But yes, HBO has picked it up, and it's going to be one of the like a mini series on HBO.
It sounds really.
So you'll be able to watch it.
Sounds exciting.
It's going to be really good, and I think Elena is going to like cameo in it. And
that's cool.
I don't think she's going to be a character, but they
just
kind of alluded
she'll
be in the background,
kind of like in the Twilight series.
Yes,
yeah.
So yes, it is actually going to be. I don't know when that's going to be coming out, but I know HBO for sure has picked it up, and yeah, I could see it though. It'll be a good show.
While we're talking about things that are coming out, since we've already gone down a rabbit trail,
funny you should say that. Given our episode this week, continue.
Oh dear, Disenchanted is coming out. Enchanted,
yes,
the sequel,
yes.
I'm so excited.
We know that.
My husband
you're going to be excited.
Is so excited.
Sure.
I mean, he was so funny last night. He said, did you see that there is another Enchanted coming out? It's Disenchanted. I was like, yeah, we can have a movie night. He said, I thought you'd say that. I was like, I know. So
it's going to be. Meanwhile, our weekend, we watched the Chernobyl miniseries on HBO. So
Michael's already watched that.
These are the differences between, we just got HBO Max.
Uh-huh.
And I've already seen the first episode, and my boyfriend is like obsessed with Chernobyl.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating too.
Oh, yeah, it's
but
cool.
I kept telling him, I was like, there's this show and you would really like it. And I finally remembered, I was like, it's an HBO miniseries. And so we turned that on and we watched that this weekend. Episode, for any animal lovers out there, just don't watch episode 4.
I didn't watch it. Michael did. And he really liked it.
It's very well made.
Yeah, he said that. And it was very interesting. And I'm sure that had I, been up there and watched it with him, I would have, enjoyed it, and it would have been very educational.
I was going to ask you a question, but you would know the answer. To me, as we were watching it, and I kept seeing the dates pop up, I was like, hold on a second. And my boyfriend was like, what? And I was like, I'm sorry. Hold on. My timeline is so messed up. I was like, you mean to tell me
I was alive when it happened?
This did not happen in like the early 70s. Like in my brain, it happened in like the 60s or 70s.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, well, probably because their technology is so far behind that when you're watching it, it really does look like, and it does because the technology there is so far behind. But he was 2.5 when it happened. We were talking about like the time, because I wasn't like, obviously I wasn't alive. And I was like, I wonder if I asked Leanne, but I was like, no, she was like, she would have remembered it because you were older than him by just a couple of years. So you may not remember it.
Yeah, but it's always been a thing, and it was kind of a new thing.
Oh, it's insane.
Yeah.
We were watching it and I was like, I knew how bad it was, but oh God. Anyways.
Well, the song, the 99 red
balloons.
Red balloons. Yeah, that's about Chernobyl.
It is, man, it's a good miniseries. But yeah, if you're an animal lover, do not watch episode 4. And you'll be fine. Like, skip the first 40 minutes of episode 4. And you'll probably be all right. But yeah, like I had a really hard time. I didn't watch it. Like I can pretty dissociate myself from some things pretty well.
But don't go after kids or animals.
That I couldn't. They were trying to decontaminate the 1,300 square mile area. So that kind of tells you some of it. Yeah. My mind was blown this weekend that Chernobyl was not that, like, I was like,
it was in my lifetime.
I was like, like I assumed it was when my mom was a kid. Like it was just because I thought it was so long ago, but man, it's crazy. And I do on TikTok, they have some people that do like the Chernobyl tours, and they like have the Geiger meters and stuff. Anyways, the whole thing, it was very well made. and very, it's suspenseful. It's kind of trying to see what happens next. So back on track.
This was born this year.
March 6th, George Dayton. This is a name that we should all know and love. He is a businessman and founder of the Target Corporation.
Target.
He's a Pisces. May 17th, we have Mary Devens. She's an American photographer who was considered one of the 10 most prominent pictorial photographers of the early 20th century.
Good for her.
She's a Taurus. May 19th, we have John Jacob Abel. He was an American biochemist and pharmacologist who established the pharmacology department at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in 1893 and then became America's first full-time professor of pharmacology.
Well, thank you, kind sir.
Yes, thank you, sir. He is a Taurus. September 15th, this name will be familiar. William Howard Taft was born. He was the 27th president of the United States.
There you go.
And the 10th Chief of Justice of the United States. He was a Virgo, much like yourself.
I was going to say, I know what it is.
November 5th, the middle name of this person is, first of all, this was me in a past life, had to be.
She's a witch.
And her middle name. She has a fantastic middle name. Ida Minerva.
Oh, so fun.
Tarbell. She was an American writer, investigative journalist, biographer, and lecturer. She was one of the leading muckrakers of the progressive era of the late 19th century and early 20th and pioneered investigative journalism.
You're pretty good at raking some muck.
I'm pretty good at that, yeah. Whether others people's or my own. Depends. But she was a Scorpio. Moving on to our deaths in 1857. June 19th, we have Alexander Twilight. Such a fun last name.
That is.
He's an educator and minister and the first African American known to have earned a bachelor's degree from an American college or university, which was Middlebury College, in 1823.
Wow.
He obtained a degree from there.
Well, I was going to ask if he was of Empire, but I guess not.
Maybe.
I mean, Twilight. I
We
was
don't
just
know.
curious.
We don't know. He could be.
I mean,
He still walks among us today.
or maybe he stepped out and became shiny and people attacked
Maybe.
him. I don't know.
Who knows? October 10th, Thomas Gibson Crawford died. He was an American sculptor who is best known for his numerous artistic contributions to the United States Capitol. No big deal. Including the Statue of Freedom that's on the dome.
Oh, just
that.
Just that.
Just that.
Thing.
So moving on to, you know how I love coming up with an acronym for something that's fun.
Oh, it is fun.
I've now named this section.
Oh dear.
This is our ONUC Spy of the Week, our special person of the year. Isn't it a good one?
I love it.
I liked it. So there is one person born in 1857 that deserves a bit of attention.
Okay.
His name is known worldwide and one that you can't enter a grocery store, convenience store, bodega, or passive vending machine without seeing. Because on September 13th of 1857, Milton Hershey was born. He is a Virgo. So we're going to talk about the great Milton Hershey this week and how the empire began.
I'm so thankful it did.
It's an interesting story and a kind of sad one at some points, but there's a lot to it that he was a good guy, it seems. I mean,
have you been to Hershey Park?
I haven't been, but we're going to talk about it.
We went.
Milton was born to Henry and Veronica Hershey. His family were of Swiss and German descent, so of course, chocolate, and members of Pennsylvania's Mennonite community, and he grew up speaking Pennsylvania Dutch. Henry Hershey rarely stayed anywhere too long, and he was prone to leaving his wife and child for long periods. Because of this, Hershey had a very limited education with no schooling beyond the 4th grade.
Whoa.
Yeah. In 1871, Milton Hershey left school for good and was apprenticed to a local printer, Sam Ernst, who published a German English newspaper. He didn't really like that kind of work, and he thought that it was pretty boring.
Oh, yeah.
So one day at work there, he accidentally dropped his hat into one of the machines.
Was that accidentally in air quotes?
It wasn't, but it was good for him because he got fired from that job. And he was really worried to see how his parents were going to react. His father asked Ernst to take him back, and he did decide to give him a second chance. But Maddie Snavely, who was his aunt, and his mother had a different idea for him. They wanted him to learn the trade of candy making instead.
That was a good move.
Yep. By this time, Milton was 14, and his mother arranged for him to be an apprentice to a confectioner named Joseph Royer in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Or Lancaster. No, they say it different there. Lancaster. Which is funny.
So in this case, mother did know best.
Yes. Over the next 4 years, Hershey learned the craft of creating confections. In 1876, he moved to Philadelphia to start his first confectionery business. He traveled to Denver and found work as a confectioner, learning how to make caramels using fresh milk. He then went to New Orleans, then Chicago, and finally settled down in NYC for a bit. But by 1883, Milton was back in Lancaster, and he borrowed money from the bank to start the Lancaster Caramel Company.
Mm-hmm.
He used the caramel recipe that he had obtained during his previous travels in Denver to make candies. And he learned from his previous jobs that caramel actually sold better in bulk than in individual pieces.
Okay.
So people would buy it in bulk more than small pieces. So that was kind of like what he built the whole business on, is just selling caramel in bulk.
Okay.
And it's caramel, not caramel. Anyways.
Depends on where you're from.
Making sure we're getting that out of the way, just like it's pecan, not pecan. Just making sure. So, hey, look, I said Lancaster, right? So I deserve this one. So the company soon became a success when a man from England visited Lancaster. He loved Hershey's candies once he tasted them and placed a big order to be delivered to Britain. Hershey was able to pay off his debt to the bank and had money left over to buy more ingredients and equipment. By the 1890s, the Lancaster Caramel Company had grown exponentially. Milton had employed over 1,300 workers and had 2 factories.
That's awesome.
It's so crazy, all the good that he did. It wasn't until he traveled to Chicago for the World's Columbian Exposition that he became interested in chocolate. He took a massive risk and sold the Lancaster Caramel Company for $1 million.
Oh, and back then, that is a lot.
And then he started the famed Hershey Chocolate Company. He initially bought farmland roughly 30 miles northwest of Lancaster. This was very smart because there he could obtain the large supplies of fresh milk that he needed to create milk chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
So he did that intentionally just so everything was like right beside each other. He was especially excited about making chocolate milk, which was a luxury product at this time. Milton Hershey was determined to develop a formula for milk chocolate and market it to sell to the American public. He succeeded, and the first Hershey bar was produced in 1900. 122 years later, here we are.
Wow.
Later, Hershey's Kisses were created in 1907, and the Hershey bar with almonds came out in 1908. On March 2nd of 1903, he began construction on what was to become the world's largest chocolate manufacturing company. The facility, which was completed in 1905, was designed to manufacture chocolate using the latest mass production techniques. Hershey's milk chocolate quickly became the first nationally marketed product of its kind. The factory essentially created a town around itself with houses, businesses, churches, and an entire transportation infrastructure. Milton did go on to marry Catherine Elizabeth Sweeney in 1898, who is affectionately known as Kitty. That's just precious. Kitty Hershey. And somebody needs to name their cat that.
Kitty Hershey.
We have Kitty Hershey and Polly Purrington. So let's get on that, people. The couple actually never had children of their own due to Kitty not being able to conceive. But that didn't stop them from helping as many people, especially children, as they could. They established the Hershey Industrial School in 1909, and this was just the start of the events we are about to discuss that almost didn't happen because of a little ship we know as the Titanic.
Uh-oh.
In 1912, the Hersheys were booked to travel on the ill-fated maiden voyage of the British luxury liner, the RMS Titanic. They canceled their reservations at the last minute due to business matters. A lot of times the cancellation is, a lot of people say that it was canceled because Kitty, her health was failing at this time. They actually weren't married very long before she started to get really sick. And a lot of people say that it's because of Kitty's sickness that they canceled, but that's not true. He actually had some business matters that he had to attend to. And by this time, Kitty had actually been sick for a few years. Instead, they booked passage to New York on the German luxury liner, the SS America. The former Hershey Museum displayed a copy of the check that Milton Hershey wrote to the White Star Line Company as a deposit for their first-class stateroom on the Titanic.
Wow.
This copy is now located in the archives at the Hershey Story Museum, which actually replaced the original Hershey Museum in 2009. Sadly, Kitty died in 1915. They only got married in 1898.
Oh.
They were not married. They weren't even married 20 years. And she actually died of an unknown illness. So there's a lot of speculation as to what she died from, but it's not really known. But they weren't able to have any kids because of her illness, and she just couldn't conceive. And so
sad.
They spent all of their time just caring for other people. Milton made it his personal mission to carry on the love of children that Kitty had. And so in 1918, Hershey transferred the majority of his assets, including control of his company, to the Milton Hershey School Trust Fund to benefit the industrial school. Cool. The trust fund has a majority of voting shares in the Hershey Company, allowing it to keep full control of the company, but still it's not really held by one person. In 1951, the school was renamed the Milton Hershey School. The Milton Hershey School Trust also has 100% control of Hershey Entertainment and Resorts Company, which owns the Hotel Hershey and Hershey Park, along with many other properties. He took great pride in the growth of the school, the town, and his business. He placed the quality of his product and the well-being of his workers ahead of profits, which was not common at this time.
That's awesome.
In 1935, Hershey established the M.S. Hershey Foundation, a private charitable foundation that provides educational and cultural opportunities for Hershey residents. The foundation supplies funding for 3 entities in total. Those are the Hershey Museum and Hershey Gardens, the Hershey Theater, and the Hershey Community Archives. The founding of the Penn State Milton S. Hershey Medical School occurred in 1963. It was a gift from the Milton Hershey School Trust to the people of Pennsylvania, with an initial endowment of $50 million.
Wow.
And it only had one restriction. It had to be built in Hershey. The hospital is a teaching hospital with an annual budget exceeding the initial construction cost.
Wow.
It's crazy. Hershey chocolate actually supplied the U.S. Armed Forces with chocolate bars during World War II. These bars were called Ration D bars, and they also had tropical chocolate bars, which were later made. The Ration D bar had a very specific requirement from the Army. It had to weigh 1 or 2 ounces. It had to resist melting at temperatures higher than 90 degrees. And it had to have an unpleasant enough flavor to prevent the troops from developing cravings for them.
Oh, no.
For its service through World War II, the Hershey Chocolate Company was issued 5 Army-Navy E-Production Awards for exceeding expectations for quality and quantity in the production of the Ration D bar. The Hershey Factory Machine Shop even made some parts for tanks and machines during the war and halted production of chocolate bars for a while.
That's awesome.
Milton Hershey died of pneumonia in the Hershey Hospital on October 13th of 1945 at the age of 88. Several years later, September 13th, Milton Hershey's birthday was deemed International Chocolate Day.
Oh, very, very appropriate.
And that's Milton Hershey. He's our person of interest for the year.
Well,
so I was like, he's such a nice guy.
He's just as sweet as his product.
I know. And I couldn't find where he ever married again after Kitty. I didn't see anything. And they said that he was, he just wanted to do good for people. And and during World War II, he, they made sure that they provided all these supplies to the Army and the Navy and even shut down chocolate making for a while. And he really did care about like the greater good of the community. He built a factory and built a town around the factory because he didn't want his workers to have to travel so far to work.
Yeah.
And,
well, and Hershey Park, we went there. I went with our youth group to New York and we drove. Well, I rode in a bus, but we swung by Hershey Park on the way home. And it was in the early spring, so like the rides and stuff weren't open, but we did go there, and like that big Hershey store was open, and we ate there, and it was really neat.
There's a lot of really cool things. I couldn't actually put everything in here that they did, so there's like still a lot of stuff that I'm missing, but. They did so much good and still continue to do good.
It continues on. And what a legacy.
And what's so funny is that the way that he essentially set up everything is that the Milton Hershey Foundation has a trust that is in control, in full control of the Hershey company. But there's so many different, if one piece of the trust, say the trust were to fall apart, or say that one of the other subsidiary companies under it fell apart, there's so many that report back to other trusts and other companies that it can't collapse.
Yeah.
And so they did it in such a smart way that
there's no one person in charge.
Yeah. And there's no way for it to, there is for it to completely implode, but it's just so cool the way that they did it. There's so many checks and balances that he made sure when he was gone that everything still ran the way he wanted it, which is really cool. So
that's amazing.
Yes, that was amazing. And I liked the part about the Titanic. So had it not been for whatever business matters he had to attend to, they would have been on the Titanic. They would have met Leonardo DiCaprio. Who knows?
That might be a little bit false. You might need to check.
No, it's actually completely accurate. You didn't know that Leo was a vampire? Just saying. So, on to...
Sorry, he's not good looking enough to be a vampire. I'm just saying.
He's still good looking. I don't know. There's some people that could be, though.
Some people.
There's some people that I definitely think... they could be.
Absolutely. But he's not one of them.
Winona Ryder, one of them. She doesn't age.
I was about to say that.
She does not age. So, on to our, I would say case, but I guess event
story
for this episode.
Yes.
July 4th of 1857.
Independence Day.
And it's funny that you said rabbit trail earlier.
Oh, dear.
Because members of the Dead Rabbit.
The dadgum Dead Rabbits.
Led a group of street gangs from 5 Points into the Bowery to raid a clubhouse occupied by the Bowery Boys, which effectively incited the Dead Rabbit Riot.
I bet you couldn't say that 5 times fast.
If I gave it a moment, I probably could do it, but I don't want to. So we keep coming back to this world, it seems. We talked about it in the episode about Bill the Butcher. We talked about the murder of the hot corn girl. And so we talked more about it then.
And the corn was hot.
Exactly.
Both of them were hot.
And in the last episode where we talked about the Bond Street tragedy, we talked about the Bowery as well, because our friend, fond of guinea pigs, also fond of the Bowery. So,
hey, guinea pigs really squeak.
He had it.
Saying.
So we are back in 5 Points again. We've talked about a few different gangs in this era, and so far we've talked about the 40 Thieves and the Bowery Boys, and we've touched
horrible bunnies, dead rabbits.
We've touched on the Dead Rabbits slightly. And if you remember back to our episode on Bill the Butcher, which was episode 70, Bill was head of the Bowery Boys at this time. He is now dead. And he was actually shot by John Morrissey's men, and John Morrissey was the leader of the Dead Rabbits.
Yes.
So that's kind of where...
And they got their name because a dead rabbit was thrown in the middle of
Allegedly. We'll talk about it some more because I kind of dug into a little bit more about the Dead Rabbits. We talk about so many different things in here that sometimes it's hard to remember what's going on.
Weird to me. That just stuck in my brain. It's just weird to me.
The Bowery Boys were there first, and they were a bit of a nuisance in the area. They were blatantly anti-Irish and anti-Catholic, and made it a personal mission to make sure that immigrants weren't able to get ahead. The Bowery Boys specifically were, quote, bound by ethnic ties or nativist belief. The members tended to be deeply patriotic, and a common thread was the belief that the country was pretty well full so that newcomers were not welcomed. These sentiments...
Wait a second. How did they get here?
Exactly.
Them and their families?
Exactly.
Okay, continue.
No, you're right. Yeah.
I was just wanted to bring something up.
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure we were covering that. Okay, continue.
These sentiments are the reason that the Dead Rabbits came to exist. We've gone into heavy detail about the Bowery Boys in our previous episode, and we lightly touched on the Dead Rabbits. So we're going to dig into them.
I'm not touching a dead rabbit.
No. So we're going to we'll touch on them a little bit more.
I'm not digging into a dead rabbit either.
No. The Dead Rabbits were an Irish-American criminal street gang that were active in Lower Manhattan in the 1830s to 1850s. As I said before, they were a direct response to the uprising of the Bowery Boys. And their goal was to push down the Irish community. So obviously the Irish Americans are going to rally together and fight against that.
And they also had the fire brigades.
Yes, and we'll talk about that too. So
I'll retain
I know, you're getting it. The name is an interesting one, and allegedly, there was a meeting with the group one night, and a dead rabbit was thrown into the center of the room. The battle symbol for the group was a dead rabbit on a pike, and they had another alias as well. Those were the Mulberry Boys or the Mulberry Street Boys. They received this name from the NYPD because they were known to operate along Mulberry Street in 5 Points. And I mean,
I would stick with Mulberry.
They couldn't just be basic. They didn't want that. Well, the name was given to them by the police. So I can definitely understand how you'd be like, we're not going to keep a name that the police gave us.
Come up with something besides the Dead Rabbits.
The Dead Rabbits. The Bowery Boys and the Dead Rabbits argued about everything. And it is said in the 10-ish year span that both operated simultaneously, they had over 200 fights. I put, it's a Katy Perry song, but make it 1857. You're hot, then you're cold. You're yes, then you're no. Even though
I was thinking of the Sharks and the Jets.
That too.
Like from West Side Story.
But it was literally like sometimes they would be totally fine with each other. And then the other times it's like, you look at me wrong and you're dead. Like it's very weird. And I guess it's just like who was in control of them at that time.
Sure,
probably.
Who was in charge, yeah.
Even though there are several notable fights in their history, one of them, the one that led to the murder of Bill the Butcher, The Dead Rabbit Riots is at the top of the list. The two groups were arguing over territory, and there was an area in 5 Points that was a hot topic. See if you... Okay. It was a triangular plot of land that was known as Paradise Square. I put interesting that it's triangular, but called a square, but okay. Either way, the Bowery boys thought that they should have control over the square because essentially they thought they were better than everyone else. You know.
So they're the frat boys.
I mean, there's some good frats. Well, we'll see.
Well, yes. I mean, I'm painting with a broad brush. Painting with a broad brush. I was a sorority girl. I mean, it's okay.
The Dead Rabbits kind of had a little bit more of a practical approach to their thought.
They were the. I mean, you know what I'm saying.
The Dead Rabbits thought that they should have control of the square because their tenement slums were actually in the square.
I mean, that makes sense.
Which makes sense. But remember, this isn't a time for logic.
Nope.
It was the 81st birthday of the nation, and July 4th of 1857 was seemingly normal. Independence Day was kind of a big deal in NYC at the time because, if we remember, a good bit of the Revolutionary War was fought in New York City. But not everyone had the same ideas.
That's where the capital was.
Yes.
At the time.
Before it went to Philadelphia then.
Right. Yes. At the time it was fought.
But not everyone had the same idea of celebrating freedom. I put AKA Divorce the King Day. The Dead Rabbits were determined to get control of the square, and they gathered a group together and made their way from 5 Points to the Bowery. They knew the Bowery Boys and the Atlantic Guards, which was another gang in the area, had a clubhouse, and they were going to conduct a raid on it. It's unclear whether they thought it was empty with the fest. So it's unclear whether they thought we'll go raid it because it's going to be empty because it's 4th of July.
Everybody's going to be gone.
Or
celebrations.
If they thought it would be full and easier to take everyone out at one time. So it's either empty and easy to take over, or it's full and we'll take everybody out all at once. It's not really clear why. It's just like, we know that's there. We're headed in that direction.
There you go.
So by the time the Dead Rabbits made it to the clubhouse, around 1,000, that is a 1 with 3 zeros.
That's a lot of zeros.
Members from various gangs joined in. This is where things started to get insane. The police get involved, which is a good thing, right?
I would think.
Wrong. Because the Metropolitan and Municipal Police were feuding with each other as well.
Oh, no.
So we have to kind of go into what happened there as well. So less than a month before this, the Great Police Riot occurred in New York City Hall between the recently dissolved Municipal Police and the newly formed Metropolitan Police. It all started after the sudden death of Street Commissioner Joseph S. Taylor. Mayor Wood and Governor John King argued over a successor, and Daniel Conover was eventually selected. Arriving at New York City Hall to assume the office on June 16th. So keep in mind, this is June 16th.
And now we're July
4th.
So this is really fresh and raw.
Conover was informed that Mayor Wood had instead appointed Charles Devlin to the position. Wood had Conover forcibly removed from the building by municipal police officers.
Oh, no.
And Conover obtained 2 warrants for the arrest of the mayor. One was for inciting a riot, and the other was for violence against Conover's person. So like personal violence towards that person. It was widely speculated after that the mayor, so remember, Conover was supposed to be in charge. At the last second, Mayor Wood said, JK, Devlin is in charge. Well, it was found out later that Wood, who was the governor, received $50,000 from Devlin to secure the position, which is about $1.7 million today.
I mean...
So that's kind of where all of this started. Captain George Walling of the Metropolitan Police was assigned to carry out one of the warrants. He arrived at City Hall by himself and was allowed to speak with Mayor Wood, in his private office. Learning the purpose of his visit, Wood refused to accompany Walling, who then attempted to take him out of the building by force. Over 300 municipal officers were stationed at City Hall, and Walling was stopped and thrown out into the street.
Yikes.
He attempted several times to re-enter, arguing with Captain, it says Abraham Ackerman, who was a captain of the police, until the arrival of captains from the Metropolitan Police.
Oh, yikes.
To serve the second warrant. The municipals charged out of the building, and for over a half hour, the rival forces fought on the steps and in the corridors of City Hall. Throughout City Hall and on the steps, the Metropolitan and the municipal police are just fighting.
So the police who are charged with keeping peace in the city,
are
keeping
inciting,
law
yes.
and order, are the ones who are running amok.
Yes.
Okay.
Even through the halls of City Hall. Yeah. So it's quite a bit. The Metropolitans were eventually forced from the building in a disorganized retreat. During the riot, 53 men were injured, including one officer from the 17th precinct. Yeah, Patrolman Crowfoot. And his injuries were actually so severe that it resulted in him being invalid after that point.
Oh, no.
The wounded Metropolitans were brought to the office of James Smith and treated. Who's like, he wasn't really a doctor, but he kind of was like the doctor for the police.
He was the guy to go to get fixed up.
Yeah. While Mayor Wood and his supporters celebrated their victory in his private office. During the fight, Conover and his attorney visited Sheriff Westerfield to request that he serve the warrants. Westerfield was advised by his representatives that it was his legal responsibility to do so, and he left with 2 men for City Hall.
Oh, no.
Upon his arrival, Wood again refused to leave his office. Soon after, members of the Metropolitan Police Board met with Major General Charles Sanford, who was about to leave with the 7th Regiment for Boston. Sanford agreed to assist, and he led the entire regiment to City Hall. And they surrounded the building.
They had to get the military involved?
Yes.
Oh, no.
He entered City Hall to confront Mayor Wood. Realizing the situation, Wood agreed to submit and was placed under arrest. Within an hour of his arrest, Wood was released on bail. He was apparently never brought to trial, as records seem to indicate, and civil courts later supported that the governor had no legal right to interfere in mayoral appointments of city officials. Several months following the riot, policemen who had been injured in City Hall sued Mayor Wood and received $250 each. Wood ignored the ruling, and the officers were later paid, including their legal bills, by the city instead. So, given this incident,
there were some hard feelings toward each other.
When the police come to intervene in the fight, you know that more trouble is actually around the corner, because once the police got there, the initial goal was to break up the fight and move on. But instead, the Metropolitan and the municipal police departments,
like, hey, free for all, let's go.
They took sides in the riot. So they were like, all right, we're with the Dead Rabbits, we're with the Bowery Boys, and they took sides.
Let's go.
Yeah. And they were like, fine, we're going to do this. The chaos in the police departments is allegedly part of the reason for the riot in the first place, because the Dead Rabbits knew that the police were disorganized and that they could probably get away with more at this time.
I mean,
so they were using it to their advantage. I don't think anyone ever considered that the police would choose sides and then join in on the fight.
But I don't think anybody was really upset when that happened.
No. The fight eventually got pushed back to Paradise Square, and the altercations were taking place as far away as Pearl and Chatham Streets and the northern half of Park Row. But there were too many incidents for police to be called to every site. The following morning, the Five Pointers, who's another gang, returned to the Bowery with the Roach Guards and attacked.
I'm sorry.
Yes, these are all names of groups. The Roach Guards, yes. And they attacked the Green Dragon, which was like a popular place for the Bowery Boys to meet.
Okay.
They managed to surprise the Bowery gangsters inside the building, and armed with iron bars and large paving blocks.
Oh, no, like cobblestones. They bigger than cobblestones.
Yeah, they proceeded, like, essentially, I think of like a cement block.
Well, I'm thinking of like for garden paths,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
those
essentially.
Heavy too.
Mm-hmm. They proceeded to wreck the bar room, rip up the floor of the dance hall, and drink all the alcohol in the place.
I mean, you know, we've done all this. Let's
go.
Just drink all the alcohol.
News of the incident quickly reached the Bowery boys, who then called upon other gangs of the Bowery to join them and confront the Five Pointers at Bayard Street, where one of the largest street gang battles in the city's history occurred. Around 10 a.m., a patrolman used his nightstick to try and push through the crowd and break up the fight. He was overtaken by the crowd, and he was knocked down, beaten with his own nightstick, and stripped of his uniform. He crawled back to the sidewalk and it said, quote, in only his cotton drawers.
Well, at least they left him that.
At least they left him that. He regained his bearings and ran towards the Metropolitan Police headquarters on White Street, where he reported what happened before collapsing on the floor.
Bless his bones.
A small police squad was sent out to break up the fight. Upon reaching Center Street, the gangs turned against the police, who were forced to retreat after several officers were injured. They made a second attempt, this time to fight their way into the mob and arrest two men who they believed were the leaders of the two groups. They thought if we get kind of like a snake, you cut off the head, the rest of it'll stop.
Right.
So they were going in just for those two. just. The group responded by storming into the low houses that were lining the Bowery and Bayard Street, forcing residents out and climbing to the rooftops, where they proceeded to shower the Metropolitan Police with stones and bricks until the police fled from the area.
You know what that makes me think of? On Home Alone 2.
Yeah.
When Kevin is up there and
he's throwing them down. Yeah, essentially.
I mean, guys, the movies are funny. Please don't try any of those things because it will result in death.
It will not do well.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, that's pretty much. Yeah. Several hundred other criminals also arrived in the area, mostly burglars and thieves who were not affiliated with either side and simply took the opportunity to loot the area.
I mean, they were just having fun.
Residents and store owners all along the Bowery were forced to barricade their buildings and protect themselves with pistols and muskets. Fighting continued until early afternoon when a large police force arrived, sent by Police Commissioner Simeon Draper, and marched in close formations along the mob. Two leaders of the Dead Rabbits, not the Dead Riots, who knows, were fine. This is about to be a dead riot. That's where I was going with that.
There you go. That sounds
good. They were finally arrested by police despite heavy resistance from fellow gang members. The police took them to a nearby police precinct, followed by a group of Bowery boys. Fighting resumed as soon as the police left. Barricades were set up, and push carts and stones from which gangsters fired weapons, hurled bricks, and used clubs against their enemies lined up.
My word.
At one point, a dead rabbit person stepped in front.
I thought you were like an actual dead rabbit.
At one point, a dead rabbit was thrown into the center of the controversy, and that's how they got their name.
They used dead rabbits as weapons.
You know? He stepped in front of the barricade and used his pistol to kill two Bowery boys and wound two others despite heavy fire. He was finally knocked unconscious. Reportedly, he was knocked unconscious by a small boy whose brother was a Bowery boy.
Oh! Don't mess with my brother.
Yeah. The police returned to the area, but they were unable to re-enter and were forced to retreat several times with heavy losses each time. That's
terrifying.
This is when the military was called in. And while they waited for reinforcements, fires had been set to 2 or 3 houses while residents remained under siege. Around 9 p.m., the 8th and the 71st Regiments of the New York State Militia marched down White and Worth Streets with fixed bayonets. Accompanied by 2 police detachments of 75 men each, they moved ahead of the guardsmen, clubbing gangsters and rioters. Although neither regiment was at full strength, the show of force was enough to panic the gangsters to flee back to their hideouts. The fighting ceased, and with 500 men remaining at the city arsenal until 4 a.m., although the police and the National Guardsmen continued to patrol the district into the next day.
Wow.
The fighting lasted for 2 days, and it officially ended once the militia was brought in. 8 men were killed during the riots, with injuries reported anywhere from in the 30s to over 100 people injured. After the riots, the tensions eased for a bit between the groups, and for the most part, the Dead Rabbits got what they wanted because the Bowery Boys did not take over a portion of their neighborhood. The police and the newspapers said that the 5 Points gangs were involved in criminal activity.
You think?
Yeah. The Dead Rabbits were appalled by these accusations.
Us?
And paid for a letter to be ran in the New York Times. The letter said, quote, "We are requested by the Dead Rabbits to state that the Dead Rabbit Club members are not thieves, that they did not participate in the riot with the Bowery Boys, and that the fight on Mulberry Street was between the Roach Guards of Mulberry Street and the Atlantic Guards of the Bowery. The Dead Rabbits are sensitive on points of honor. We are assured and wouldn't allow a thief to live on their beat, much less a member of their club."
Oh.
And like most things, there is a song to commemorate the events of the Dead Rabbit Riots.
There is.
It was written by Henry Sherman Backus and Daniel Decatur Emmett. And it goes, "Then pull off the coat and roll up the sleeve, for Bayard is a hard street to travel. So pull off the coat and roll up the sleeve. The bloody 6th is a hard ward to travel, I believe. Like wild dogs, they did fight this 4th of July night. Of course, they laid their plans according. Some were wounded and some killed, and a lot of blood spilled in the fight on the other side of Jordan. The new police did join the Bowery Boys in line, with others strict and right according. Bullets, clubs, and bricks did fly, and many groan and die. Hard road to travel over Jordan. When the new police did interfere, this made the rabbits sneer, and very much enraged them accordin'. With bricks they did go in, determined for to win, and drive them on the other side of Jordan. Upon the following day, they had led another fray, the Blackbirds and the Dead Rabbits accordin'. The soldiers were called out to quell the mighty riot and drove them on the other side of Jordan."
Wow.
So, but according to the Dead Rabbits, this is fake news. They're like, we had nothing to do with us.
It wasn't us.
Dare you assume?
It wasn't me. I saw you beating him on the corner. It wasn't me.
Yeah. Pretty much.
I saw you shoot him with your pistol.
Yep. Dead Rabbits are like,
it wasn't
no,
me.
we did not do this. I don't care what you saw. Not us. It may be called the Dead Rabbit Riots, but it was not us.
We are not the dead rabbits you are looking for.
We are not. That is not our name, first of all.
That's not right. We're the Mulberry Boys.
Yeah, we're actually the Mulberry Street Boys. So we demand you print a retraction. New York Times. Just the New York Times. So, like I said, this week wasn't necessarily a case, but it was quite the event.
It was an event.
I mean, not only are the gangs fighting, but the police are fighting. It's just a whole lot. So we have a website where you can find any and all ONUC information you're looking for. It's onenationundercrime.com. We are One Nation Under Crime on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and at ONUC Pod on Twitter.
Pretty much anywhere you can look something up.
You can find us anywhere. If you would please go give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, 5 stars only. We have discussed this.
It's what we deserve.
If you have nothing nice to say,
We're a delight.
It's just how things go. We have a Patreon if you would like to help with the cost of making and hosting the show.
We would like to receive it.
It would be kind of you. So that is patreon.com/OneNationUnderCrime. We thank you guys for listening to this week's episode. We will see you here, same time,
different crime
next week. And remember, there isn't always liberty and justice for all, especially if the police are fighting.
Right?
Goodbye.
Bye.